Welcome to Integrated Korean Beginning 1.
Let's start with some facts about the Korean language. How many people speak it? Korean is ranked at the 11th most widely spoken language in the world. Did you know that? So natively spoken, it's actually 67 million Koreans on the Korean Peninsula alone. And the Korean Peninsula consists of 44 million Koreans living in the south and 23 million living in the north. And heritage Korean speakers, meaning Korean Americans living who were born in the U.S., but the parents spoke Korean, something like that. Those speakers are about 5.6 million living overseas, 2 million in China, 2 million in the U.S., and 0.7 million in Japan, and 0.5 million in former USSR. And I didn't put Russia, I put USSR here because this includes Eastern Bloc countries like Poland, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and all those countries. And then Korean as a foreign language, the way you're learning it, is also increasing very rapidly. Dialects in Korea too. Dialects, of course, naturally have been developed anywhere in the world because of the geographical barriers like the rivers and mountains and stuff like that. And people, before the times of airplanes and fast trains and stuff like that, there was not a whole lot of traveling happening. So languages would develop in one area isolated from other areas. So the vocabulary words would be different, the accents would be different, and stuff like that. Largely, Korea is divided into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 dialect areas. And if we're just looking at South Korea, the dialect that's spoken in the Seoul area, that's light green, Seoul, that's what I speak. And the yellow part, Gangwon-do, that's a province where my mother lives. Hi, Mom. And then the indigo, kind of a blue, underneath Gangwon-do is Gyeongsang. Gyeongsang, that's the area where a lot of Korean presidents come from, and even the current president comes from the area. And then darker blue, not darker, brighter. I don't know, what kind of blue is that? Really pretty blue. To the left of Gyeongsang area is Jeolla area. And then bright green going up, that's Chungcheong. They tend to speak kind of slowly. And then once again, the lime green is Seoul dialect. And then the purple, there's an island at the very bottom. That's Jeju dialect. Of all the dialects, I would think in South Korea, the Jeju dialect is probably the most different. Once again, geographically most isolated. If you want to understand the Korean language fully, you really need to contextualize it. You need to put it, situate it in relation to Chinese and Japanese. Surprisingly, Chinese and Korean they don't come from the same language family, but their influence on Korean is very, very, very heavy because culturally and technologically, China almost always has been very much more advanced than Korea. And we Koreans, old dynasties almost always had this tributary relationship with China, which means every year we would send scholars and bureaucrats to show their respect to the Chinese dynasty at the time and give gifts and learn about new technologies and science and culture and things like that. So kind of like the relationship between English and Latin and Greek, those classical languages, a lot of high caliber vocabulary comes from Chinese. For example, let me give you an example. Like sophistication in English comes from the Greek word Sophia, which means wisdom. In sophistication, these multi-syllable words in English often come from Greek or Latin. So it's the same thing in Korean, a lot of sophisticated words, multisyllable words come from Chinese. Japanese, the connection between Korean and Japanese are different from that between Korean and Chinese. Linguistically speaking, Japanese and Korean belong to the same language family. It's called Altaic languages. Altaic, there's a mountain in the, which area is it? Ural Altaic, I guess is it near Siberia? Along those lines, I've forgotten. Anyway, they might even be remotely related to Mongolian and Turkic languages, but Japanese and Korean are the most similar of those languages, and the origin of these two languages are kind of a little mysterious. I mean, the closest speculation is Altaic languages, and they might remotely be related to Turkic languages. But what's really remarkable between Korean and Japanese is that their grammar and word order are very, very, very similar, but the vocabulary are very different. Japanese, kind of like Korean, also has had very heavy influence from Chinese and culturally from China as well. So I'm going to give you examples so that you can see the connection between among these three languages. For example, the word for Korea is Hanguk, Hanguk. And you can see the first row is the Chinese character, and it's pronounced in Chinese as Hanguo, Hanguo, Hanguo. But in Korean, going down, you can write it in Chinese characters, like the first row, or you can write in Korean using Korean characters, Hangul, which is the second part. But the pronunciation, although they can be written the same way, the pronunciation is slightly different. Hanguk, Hanguk, Hanguk. And then if you look at Japanese, it's written exactly the same way as Chinese. So all people living in China, Korea, and Japan can understand when they see these characters that this means the country of Korea. But once again, the pronunciation of the same word in Japanese is yet different. It's Kangoku, Kangoku, Kangoku. And you hear some similarities. So this is what happened. Hanguk comes from China, but because Korea is far away from China, and then Japan even farther away from China, as the word traveled, it had become what us linguists call bastardized. So the pronunciation has become different. And then once it has landed in Korea and Japan, it has kind of perverted, according to the local colors, and then the perverted version kind of got stuck in the same geographical area. Does that make sense? Same thing, I'm sure sophistication, the word Sophia, when Greek people pronounce that word, it's probably pronounced differently, right? Same thing with college, okay? The Chinese character for college is written here, and then right after the slash, this is a simplified version of that same word. And in Chinese, it's pronounced as something like dashe, dashe. Tashe, I'm guessing. In Korean, it can be written the Chinese way or the Korean way, and the pronunciation is dehak, dehak, dehak. And then it goes to Japan, probably from Korea. The spelling is the same as Chinese, but the pronunciation is daigaku, daigaku, daigaku. So I hope this helps you kind of contextualize how these three languages are related and unrelated to each other. So accordingly, the vocabulary distribution is different. So the red part is Sino-Korean words in Korea, and they indicate things like cultural objects or concepts, stuff like that, more high caliber words in Korean. And then the lime green is the native Korean words. It's kind of like Anglo-Saxon words. Very simple words like go, I'm guessing, apple. These are probably Anglo-Saxon words. And they usually indicate simple things or body parts. Leg, I'm guessing that's Anglo-Saxon. But a lot of times, like put is probably Anglo-Saxon, like put out, but extinguish is a Latin version of put out. You know what I mean? So much the same way, native Korean words usually indicate daily necessities, simple actions, locations, body parts, or low-level numbers, etc. And then this blue part is loan words, and 90% of them come from English. And let me give you examples of loan words, and these all come from English. So apartment, and it's pronounced as 아파트, 아파트. You can see we also shortened it because apartment would have been just too long. 아파트, and it's spelled 아파트. Boiler becomes 보일러, 보일러, 보일러. Cake becomes, which is one syllable in English, becomes a three-syllable word, 케이크, 케이크. Because Koreans don't like to end a word with a consonant sound, as in cake. We have to add a vowel at the end, so 케이크. Coffee becomes 커피, 커피. We cannot do F. There's no F sound in Korean, so the closest approximation is P. So 커피, 커피, 커피. Computer becomes computer, computer, computer. Condominium becomes condo, condo, condo. Hotel becomes hotel, hotel, hotel. Ice cream becomes 아이스크림, 아이스크림. 5 syllables. 아이스크림. Opera becomes opera, opera. Sports becomes 스포츠, 스포츠, 스포츠. Television becomes 텔레비전, 텔레비전, 텔레비전. So now you can tell we're going to have fun, right?